Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, a San-mai Damascus hunting knife. Welcome back to part 2 of my San-mai Damascus hunting knife build. Next, we'll move on to heat treating, the process by which the blade is brought to its final condition of hardness, the one appropriate for use as a cutting tool. I'll begin by using a Japanese technique, placing a refractory clay on the spine of the blade. This technique, used in traditional Japanese sword making, allows the spine of the blade to be kept soft while the edge hardens. I'll harden the blade by heating it to roughly 1500 degrees Fahrenheit, then sequentially quenching it in water and peanut oil. This process will assure full hardness for the W2, but lessen chances of cracking. Notice that I didn't say it'll assure that you won't get cracks. It just lessens the chance of problems. Even the most skilled smith can cause microscopic cracks to form in the blade during the quench, resulting in what is now about 3 days' work ending up in the trash. Everything looks pretty good right now though, so next the blade goes through the 2 tempering cycles of 400 Fahrenheit. The blade has been successfully hardened, so I'll bring the bevels to final thickness with a very fine grit belt. Care has to be taken at this point. If you overheat the blade the slightest bit, you'll spoil the hardness of the steel and have to re-quench, which brings with it added possibilities of cracking. Additionally, because the differing steels used in the blade expand and contract at different rates during the hardening, a knife of this type brings with it a much higher than average likelihood of warpage. And in fact, this blade did warp a hair at the tip, requiring very slow, careful shaping on the grinder to bring the blade back into perfect symmetry. And on to the final sanding and surfacing of the blade. This is a very slow, laborious process involving a lot of handwork and a lot more steps than I'll show here. Anybody who enjoys this part of knife making has something deeply wrong with them. Every single solitary scratch mark from all previous operations has to be removed and the blade brought to a nice, even finish. If you ease up here though and let the drudgery get the better of you so that a bunch of scratches remain in the blade, you end up with a blade that's unworthy of all this energy that you've already put into it. Now I'll shape the handle. I'm using a spectacular piece of stabilized burl wood. Now burls are beautiful, but because the grain runs in all different directions, they're also fairly fragile. As I profile it, I'll need to be very careful not to get too forceful with it, as it can crack easily. Stabilizing, that is, impregnating the wood with a hard resin, helps make it a little stronger, but it's still fairly fragile. I'll split the blank in half, then flatten the pieces on my disc grinder. Any flatness problems, either here or on the blade's tang, will result in unsightly gaps between the handle and the steel, so care and technique has to be used to assure flatness. I'll then drill the holes on my mill, again using the exact same dimensions that I did in drilling the holes in the blade itself. Next, I'll mark out the outlines of the handle scales. Then off to the bandsaw where the outline's roughed out. Precision's wasted here since it's impossible to cut to the sort of tolerances necessary to mate perfectly with the blade outline, so I'll just hog it out, leaving a little extra to be removed later. Then, back to the locator pins, and the wood is perfectly mated to the outlines of the blade on the grinder. Depending on how you're etching the blade, you may need to do it now, or you may be able to do it later. So now that I've got the blade really nice and clean, I'll give it one last inspection using a jeweler's loupe so I can really see everything that's there. It's not until you've reached this final surface that you can really be assured that everything's absolutely perfect. And guess what? Near the tip of the blade, I find a couple of minuscule hairline fractures, sometimes referred to as fingernail fractures, which typically only form where the hardened part of the steel meets the unhardened portion of the steel at the tip of differentially hardened blades. So you really only see these on blades that have hamones. These fractures are so small that people could look at this for an hour and never see them, but I know they're there. So, this $1,000 knife has now just transformed itself into a piece of scrap metal. Roughly 3 or 4 days of work has just gone up in smoke. It would take a much stronger man than me to avoid the several minutes of cursing and anguish which ensue. If you haven't seen the Big Lebowski F-bomb roll, you can pull that up on YouTube and hear, a sort of weak version of what the next few minutes sound like inside my shop. Now at this point, I was pretty sure everything was fine, so I'd already told my client that I was a week or so away from finishing the blade. Well, that's not going to happen. Unfortunately, I'm just about to head up to New York City to film a TV show, so this blade's not going to be finished for a matter of weeks. If you've ever ordered a custom knife from a bladesmith and wondered why the blade didn't get completed as fast as the smith told you it would, well, this video's the answer. Stuff like this just happens. When you make things in a production environment, you can repeat the same operations over and over, and the kinds of things that go wrong here, you just eliminate from production. But in a one-off custom knife like this, sometimes you're forced to take chances in order to accomplish certain effects that sometimes don't work out. And when that happens, you just got to go back, man up, do it over again. So, off I go to New York, film the show, come home, and get back to work repeating the exact same thing I just showed you. So after sanding and cleaning it all up, I'll immerse this new blade in a bath of ferric chloride, which will reveal the Damascus pattern in bold relief. The oxide film is then cleaned off the steel and the blade polished to its final appearance. Once I'm happy with the appearance of the etch, the handle's epoxied to the blade, taking ridiculous precautions not to stain the blade, scratch the blade, mar the etch, put fingerprints on the steel, rust the blade, whatever. There are a million things that can go wrong at this point, and if any of them happen, I have to bust off the $75 pieces of wood, totally repolish it, and then find a new piece of wood for the handle. after the appropriate cure time, the handle is shaped on the grinder, then given a last careful hand sanding. So, there's always a risk in showing how the sausage is made, but I figured you might be curious. A lot of times on YouTube we show blades being made, omitting the difficulties, mistakes, accidents, do-overs, and so on. But I figured you'd be interested in seeing what it's really like. So, total number of hours invested in this project, my guess, roughly 75 hours. So you divide the amount I made on the knife by the number of hours, minus the cost of materials, abrasives, propane, overhead, blah blah blah. At least on this project anyway, I end up making somewhere in the neighborhood of half what the girl at the drive-in window at McDonald's makes. So, if you ever walk through a knife show and wonder why custom knives cost so damn much, well, now you know the answer. Now, I've got to say, this was not a typical project. You know, it's pretty rare that I have a blade fail at this stage of the game anymore, but any water-hardened blade can fail, no matter how good the smith. You know, the highest level Japanese swordsmiths or whatever, they have blades fail. It just has a high potential for failure when you do straight water quenching. So, the more complex the knife, the more possibilities that you have for failure. So, as you probably saw, as I walked through this project, there were roughly, 8 or 9, 10, points that were sort of potential failure points. Some of them weren't make or break. They just would have resulted in a substantial redo of a particular chunk of work. But some of them, as you saw, it's just total do-over time. So, as many of you know, I'm in the process of turning the corner from making very long, complex blades, some of them far more complex than this, that literally take months to complete, to moving in the direction of production knife making. Why? Well, the answer is pretty much right here in this video. So the point of this is not to whine about how hard my job is, but just to give a little perspective on just how tricky it is to produce a relatively high quality custom knife. Hey guys, if you found value in this video, I hope you'll consider partnering with the channel to help us bring more videos, better videos, more knives, more techniques, all that cool stuff. Click the link to Patreon to help this channel. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, bro, what are you waiting on? And check me out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. Also, if you're into Japanese swords, check out my website, waltersorrellsblades.com, where you'll see more of my work and where you'll find videos about the making of Japanese swords, along with mounting, fittings, polishing, hamones, all kinds of good stuff. Now, more videos.